Hello everyone. Welcome to another series of Polishing the Classics, a series in which we analyse classic endgames with engines and discover amazing new details and incredible new plans. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and we are looking today at the game between Vassily Smyslov and Alexander Konstantinopolsky, played in Leningrad, Moscow, 1939. Now, I've been analysing endgames a lot with my engines recently, and quite a few Rook and minor piece endgames. And rather confrontationally, my engines have been converting a lot of those endgames into Rook endgames, which is something I find quite stressful. Why is that? It's not really due to lack of work. I've done my fair share of learning theoretical endings by rote and repeating them and analysing them and learning them. But the thing about Rook endings is that they're extremely volatile. You know, within a few moves, swathes of pawns can be cleared from the board. You know, advantages that you thought were permanent, they just disappear with all those exchanges, and you're cursing Tartakova again for his witticism that all Rook endings are drawn. And, actually, just from my point of view, the volatility of Rook endings, that sort of hits a weak spot in my game. I suppose, more my over-the-board playing ability, because I don't react well intuitively to sudden changes, unexpected changes in the position. And that's why it's very important for me, actually, to play my time well in over the board games, because I always need a few minutes to just to recalibrate and refocus when the position changes suddenly. It's a peculiar property of Rook endings, and it's illustrated very well by this example, which I came across in a recent book by the German endgame specialist Carsten Müller. And the game was also annotated by Smyslov in his 125 selected games, and by Averbach in his Rook Endings volume of the 5-volume endgame series, the classic one. So, in actual fact, White has a decisive advantage here. So, the engines give between +3 and +4, so in principle quite trivial. What's it due to? It's due to the advanced pawn supported by the Rook, the powerful White King, which is able to push through the centre and push the black king away, and also the weakness of the black queenside pawns. So, for example, a king on c4, is very nastily attacking the pawn on b4. However, the presence of two open files in the centre does indicate that black, somehow is likely to be able to enter White's 7th rank, capture some pawns, and create, at the very least, the appearance of some counterplay. It's the sort of the nature of endgame play, really, that the powerful pieces, especially rooks, they're impossible to tame completely, because basically the space that you occupy, you're defending that with fewer and fewer pieces as the endgame progresses. So it's not unexpected that powerful pieces like rooks can always find some play. But it is very easy to feel, during a practical game, especially when time's running short, that that you're displaying poor technique when the opponent manages to escape in this way. I think the only point that you can point to in Black's favour in this position is that Black's got a kingside pawn majority, so it just means that White's got to be slightly careful about exchanging off rooks. Because you can't just rely on and then I'll just queen my queenside pawn, because Black also has the possibility to create a passed kingside pawn as well. So let's have a look how the game progressed. Smyslov played king d4, king e6 to stop the king from pushing through to d5, rook e1 check. Actually, my engines found something or played something just a little bit more elegant here. What's White's dream here? White's dream would be to get a rook into d6. On the 6th rank, attacks the pawn, and then it can swing over, get into the 7th rank, and then the king can come in, help push the pawn. So, Koivisto was playing king c4 first, for example, and after f5 going rook d1, f4, rook d6 check, king f5, rook takes a6, which is a very nice clear way of doing it. Now, even there, you can sort of think, it's Black getting some passed pawns there, but rook g5 check, rook d5, we cut off the king like that, and then afterwards the yeah, the c pawn is just queening, so dead easy. That was probably the most elegant way, I think, of winning the game. Just to attack the pawn and then just free the advance of the rook to d6. That was very nice indeed. But what Smyslov did was very sensible. Rook e1 check, king d7, king d5, and these three moves, White has basically put his king very far advanced, occupied the e-file, so we're keeping this rook under wraps, and we're threatening either c6 check or rook e6 to d6, so pretty good. So black really has to try and prevent both those threats. There's two ways of doing it. In the game, Konstantinopolsky played rook b5, the idea being that rook e6 is met by rook takes c5 check, which is quite annoying. In fact, my engines were tending to play rook c8, which sort of achieves the same thing, and it was basically pretty good for White. It didn't really make much difference. This was how Stockfish did it against Koivisto. h4. This is a favourite move of Stockfish, looking to play h5 actually, just to tie down these pawns so that you can attack them quite easily. So g6 played, b3. All the engines were playing this move, and I think it's a very sensible move. Afterwards, you can follow up with rook e2, and you can cover your 7th rank, so goodbye black counterplay. And then afterwards, you can decide how to get in. Probably, a move like king c4, and then rook d2 to d6 is going to be the way to do it. But f5 played, rook e5. We're going to see this theme in the game. Rook e5 played, threatening h5, so going to force black really to play h5 and completely stymie these kingside pawns. Again, make them easier to attack. And then f4, rook e4, g5 takes, rook b4, so attacking like this, and then we get the rook onto the 7th. And again, it's completely clear there. So yeah, all those ways are just winning, and you'll notice there somehow though that the engines managed to really keep the black rook under wraps there. So after rook b5, rook e4 from Smyslov, and that's given an exclamation mark by him. It actually introduces a really typical technique. Smyslov said White's advantages become clear. His king and rook dominate in the centre of the board, and now his rook switches to the 4th rank to attack the kingside pawns. And what's the idea of attacking the kingside pawns? Actually, it's something that I learned as a young boy. I got shown this theme very early, which was very useful because I've used it many times. I mean, you're not necessarily trying to win a pawn when you move over to the king side, though of course that's welcome. You're not even just trying to break through to the 7th rank, which would obviously also be very welcome. The key thing is that what you want to do, you want to create holes in the black structure. There are holes now, but those pawns are quite a way away from the white king, so you want to get those pawns moved forwards with holes. And then, the white king is very close to them and can move very easily to attack them. That's the basic idea. The one thing you've got to be aware of, and I have fallen foul of this, certainly in blitz games, is that when you're sort of executing this beautiful technique and feeling very grandmasterly, what you are doing is you are actually giving black some tempi to bring his pawns closer towards you. So whenever you actually engage in a pawn race, you're on the queen side trying to queen your pawns, and black is on the king side trying to queen his kingside pawns, well, you have actually given black a number of free tempi, so it can actually end up closer than you sort of had in your thoughts originally. But in principle, it's a very good technique. Create holes, bring the pawns forward closer to the white king, and then that makes them easier for the white king to come in and attack. Again, what here, Stockfish against Koivisto. Stockfish was just playing b3 and rook e2 in this position, and then going just to restrict the the pawns with h5, and then afterwards rook e4 and coming in. That works as well. But rook e4 is good technique in principle. So g6 played. And now Carsten Müller suggests rook h4, h5, g4, which is pretty strong. The idea being that after hg we come to h7, and then we're coming in with king pawn. We're not going to need anything here. We're just going to queen the c pawn. That would have been a pretty strong idea. What Smyslov did was very thematic as well. So h4, black played f5, and now rook f4, threatening h5, which will break up the kingside pawns, open up the f-file, and then allow white to come into the 7th rank. So black plays h5 here, and Averbach comments now, now the pawns are fixed, and white can set about attacking the g6 pawn. So in all this, you notice how passive the black rook is. I mean, it's really finding it very hard to get active. And a move like rook a5 is met by rook takes b4 and then rook b7. So white's doing an absolutely great job here of keeping the black rook under wraps. But now, without really being, totally clear why, it goes just goes a little bit odd in a way, or you get this moment where you sort of say, that's strange. Should black really have had that counterplay? Carsten Miller suggests rook f3 in this position, which is quite interesting. The idea is to come round, if rook b8, come round to g3. And attack the pawn on g6. That's quite a decent way of doing things. I guess after rook f3, black will try rook a5 and then just simply attack the pawn a2, try and get counterplay that way. But Smyslov played rook d4, staying nice and central. That's pretty good way of doing things, really. I mean, you're never going to go too wrong if your pieces are sort of grouped around the centre. Even if you make a misstep, then it's very easy to correct. So king c7, b3 now played, so protecting against rook a5. Obviously, the king stopping the rook coming into b7, so rook b4 would not be as powerful. But rook a5, we can just go rook d2, rook b5, king c4. This was Smyslov's line, attacking the pawn on b4, and then the rook's coming to d6. Actually, this is what Stockfish and Koivisto were doing, but Smyslov's, a number of tempi slower, really. But it doesn't really matter, that much. But now after b3, Konstantinopolsky decided that rook b8, king c4, rook e8 was the way. Now the rook had to be activated. And this is the sort of moment that I'm talking about. And I mean, in long games it's not so difficult, but in blitz games or rapid games when you're getting towards the end, this can get very confusing because there's going to be checks, there's going to be captures of pawns, and then you've got to try and work out. I mean, what you need to do when this is happening is just to have a good feeling about the end structure that you're going for. That's the key point. I mean, the commentators are not too worried. Averbach says black has also managed to activate his rook, but white is the first to begin attacking, and Smyslov makes no comment whatsoever. So I guess he thought it was quite obvious, but I mean, this is still the sort of thing that can be worrying if you haven't got very much time, because we go rook d6. King b4 was the engine preference, and after rook e2, rook d6, just hitting g6 and a6. I mean, we get something like rook g2, rook a6, and then, rook g4 check, king b5. White's way ahead, but still, you're looking at some passed pawns, and maybe the pawn will get to f3 or f2 before you finish off your job. It's still a little bit of stress, maybe, with short of time. But king b4 was definitely the safer way. But rook d6 played, which is, very good as well, very thematic, hitting g6 and a6. So rook e4 check played, which is, I guess one of the reasons why taking on b4 was probably a little bit better. King d5, rook h4, rook g6, and now rook g4. And this is black exploiting the kingside pawn majority that we mentioned earlier to offer the exchange of rooks. So it's I always find that's a certain show of strength in endgames, to be able to offer an exchange. But white can decline it, but the slaughter of the pawns continues. So rook a6, rook takes g2, rook a7 check, king b8, and rook h7 played by Smyslov. There are other ways to play it, but this is quite decent, and it's quite interesting to consider the end. And then rook h5. And, such a lot has happened in the past 6 moves. If you're... if your mind was conditioned to the the easy control that white seemed to have before this all happened, something like this, for example, where white had a king in the center, passive black rook, a host of tempting targets in the king-size structure. Then when you get this, you might think, oh, have I done this right? Is it really okay? Because the rule of thumb is that pawn exchanges favour the weaker side, because it brings the game closer to a position without pawns, which should increase the drawing chances. But it is slightly more nuanced than that. From the perspective of the stronger side, pawn exchanges, they certainly reduce the margin of victory you can enjoy. You can't win by 6 pawns if there's only 2 on the board. But that doesn't necessarily mean that exchanges make the win less certain. You could also see pawn exchanges as clearing away all the irrelevant, distracting stuff and coming down to the essentials of the position. And Smyslov's comment is simply that the mutual elimination of pawns has not eased black's position. And then he says, as before, the white king and pass c pawn constitute a formidable force. And that, it's nitpicking what I'm going to say now, but I don't actually think that comment covers it, because if you actually would take away these pawns on b4 and b3, so just take them off the board, assume they'd been exchanged in some way, then we're actually looking at a table-based draw. And why is that? It's simply that the king actually isn't shielded enough from checks from the black rook. In particular, when the king moves onto the b file, the rook can check it from behind. So having the pawns on b4 and b3, that shields the white king. When it goes to b6, it can no longer be checked from behind. And that's the factor that's making the king and the c pawn so strong. So in actual fact, if you were thinking, 5, 6, 7 moves before, or what's the end structure that I need to go for, it's not king plus c pawn, it's king plus c plus b pawns. And the fact that the b file isn't open and the king is shielded, that makes this combination so dangerous. Also, of course, slightly more trivially as well, the fact that the b pawns are on the board means that white can actually just come round and pick up the pawn, and then have 2 connected pawns. And again, the big advantage of having a b pawn is that as the pawns move up and the king moves up with them, the b pawn shields the king from checks from behind. Even if this pawn gets round to f2, you block it from f5, f7 or something, and then it won't advance anymore, and then your connected pass pawns advance inexorably. So that's quite interesting in actual fact. All those exchanges, actually they've ended up clarifying white's advantage. But again, it was very important for white to understand what he was aiming for. A bit of carelessness, letting those pawns get exchanged somehow, and you end up in a table-based draw. So that's quite interesting. I thought that was a very nice illustration of lots of not difficult but rather important endgame concepts. So, after rook h5, rook c2 was played, and you could just play rook takes f5 and then try and line up on this pawn, but Smyslov really, you can tell from his comment he was thinking about the king and the c pawn, and he really made a lot of use of that. And it's what we say, the pawns are shielding the king, so this king gets active, and this king here gets passive, and I mean, just maybe another little point as well, that you can say about the exchanges here is that you do notice that by having all those pawns exchanged, white did lose the possibility to create a remote pass pawn, pass pawn that was away from the black king. So in that case, it's like really important that this king and c pawn combination is lethal. Because the black king is actually well placed, to try and fight back against the pass pawn that remains with white. So again, very important to have this structure in your head. So king c6, king a7, king b5. We're going to give a check, and then we're going to come here. No checks from behind, no checks from the side, protected by the c pawn. So it's not looking good for black. rook e8, c6, f4, and then yeah, that's one of the nice things about having a c pawn. I mean, there are some positions with, for example, if you have a white b pawn, that you know, even when you've got this incredibly passive structure with black, with a king on the back rank and a rook having to be on the back rank to stop white delivering mate, you know, with a b pawn, there's no actual way of forcing anything. But with the c pawn, it all works. Rook a7. And here black resigned, because if we play king b8, then c7 check just wins very easily. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed that. I think it's a very simple endgame, you know, and nothing complicated. But I think it really does show you know, an awful lot of points about basic technique, and also, you know, what you can expect from endings, you know, and in particular, I think this idea of you know, the rooks are powerful pieces. As you get an endgame, you know, your the position that you were covering before with lots of pieces, you're suddenly only covering with a few pieces. So it's probably quite inevitable that somehow your opponent finds a way to activate its rook. So, you know, that's not necessarily you know, a terrible thing to happen, but obviously, you know, you've got to see the best way that you can to keep that under wraps, and also to make sure that if your opponent starts grabbing pawns, that you can do that too. And you know, I thought that this point about you know, trying to keep a grip in your head of, you know, what structure am I aiming for whilst all these exchanges are happening, whilst all this volatility is happening, I think that's very impressive indeed, you know. And I think that yeah, you know, this was a very nice example of the value of, you know, sometimes of just one crucial pawn shielding your king from checks, because in rook endings, checks, you know, are the basically the main way that that a weaker side keeps the stronger side at bay. And then just maybe one final treat, you know, just this was in this position after rook g4. Here Smyslov played rook takes a6, you know, and started hoovering up pawns, as he was wont to do. But here Komodo actually played a very nice idea. Played rook f6, rook g2, rook f7 check, king d8, because Stockfish didn't want to get its king, you know, go back to b8 and get king c6 to b6 and then c6. And then white played king c6, h4, king b7. Ah, really nice. The pawns coming to c7, the rooks cutting the king off, and also supporting the advance of the pawn to c7. I hadn't seen that sort of thing before, not consciously anyway. So it's yeah, very nice little theme there. Okay, well, if you enjoyed the video, why not give me a like or subscribe to the channel? Desperately trying to get up to 1,000, but still some way to go. Or otherwise, take a look at my book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which is chock-a-block full of absolutely great openings, middle games, and end games from the TCEC. And otherwise, thanks very much for watching this video, and hopefully see you at the next one.